It's August 10th, 2020. I'm going to talk to Carolyn Steward from Melbourne in Australia about the corona measures taking place there and the coronavirus happening there. Now in Australia, it's currently winter. So she's in winter. She's going to complain about the weather probably. So, welcome, you're in Potkaars. So that's a pot with a candle in Dutch. And it sounds like a podcast, and that's what it is also. And that's my guest. Hey, Carolyn.
Hello.
We have met in person in 2017, where you were...
Almost 3 years ago.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Busy. Very busy.
Back then you were entrepreneur, you had a business, and right now you're a teacher, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
Correct. I was a school teacher before I met my husband, and I've gone back to teaching because the economy went up and down, and now I've got 2 small children. Teaching really fits in with the family.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I invited you because I'm reading things about Australia, about lockdown measures taking place in Australia, about the coronavirus having an impact there. So I thought, let's call Carolyn. And there you are.
I know.
You agreed. So this is going to be about how Australia is dealing with the 2009 coronavirus. We're recording this from Europe, from the Netherlands in Europe, and you're in Melbourne, Australia. Oh, I got a picture. Hang on. Should have brought my keyboard. So it's a massive city, but I got a picture. So overimposed on us is a picture of Australia with Melbourne sitting on the bottom, so people know where you are.
Correct.
I've never been there. I flew over it once to New Zealand on vacation. Let's see if I can ever visit Australia again with all this coronavirus stuff going on. But yeah, first off, so we're going to talk about the coronavirus, its impact, and the measures taken specifically where you live. But before we do that, how are you doing? How's your family doing? Your friends? Are people sick? How's it going?
To be honest, it's taking its toll on everybody. I'm trying to function as normal, but it's you can't avoid it. The restrictions are quite severe. Only one person in the family is allowed to shop. So the government is very specific because they couldn't flatten the curve, or they couldn't get we were recording just in Victoria alone 750 new cases a day. So they tried at stage 3, which had restrictions, but nowhere near as stringent and very, very strict now.
All right. So when you say cases, does that mean people in hospital or positively tested?
Positively tested.
So before we go into that, I want to do it in a certain order. So this thing started in China, right? Like December last year, and then it moved across the world. I don't know, February, March or something. It's when it took place here in the Netherlands. Now, those first few months in our lockdown in the Netherlands were about people hospitalized, people in intensive care, and people dying.
Yes.
Yes. Now, for Australia, that first wave, if you will, didn't hit for maybe 2 reasons. And one is, well, it's an island. It's a very big island. But as I understand it, first approach of Australia was trying to keep the virus off Australia. Is that correct?
We were very aware of what was happening in Europe, especially in Italy. The images coming out of Italy, real Australians pictured that it was real. When we very, very first heard about it, especially the elderly generation, they were like, well, I'm not going to let my life stop because of a virus. Australia relies on a lot of international students. So our first case was a international student from Wuhan who came, I believe it was December, and he flew into Sydney and presented the symptoms, and he was the very, very first person who brought the virus into Australia. We have a lot of Chinese students, a lot.
So actually, you might have had the virus on mainland of Australia before it even hit the Netherlands then, if you say it like that.
Very possible.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
And then there was talk of it in January. In February, because that was our summer, people were coming off cruise ships, and it was more like, well, if you're sick, stay home, but there was nothing in place. So there was the awareness, but no one was doing anything about it. Does that make sense? That was January, February.
Well, the
people weren't taking it seriously. Yeah.
Well, same here. When it first started, they were all very slow to respond, and then now, like half a year later, they're very dramatic in their response. But the difference between you in Australia and here in Europe is that first wave with you hit in summer. Now, viruses like influenza and coronavirus, they don't do much in summer. So,
and that's exactly what we're experiencing now. Just the virus seems to love these conditions, these winter conditions.
Yeah, so let's go. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware of the Ruby Princess. That was quite a big thing here in Australia. So that's owned by Princess Cruises. The company telephoned the port to say we've got 200 and so there was 2,700 people on board. They couldn't test for coronavirus on that ship. However, the Princess Cruises claim they did nothing wrong. They did let authorities know there was people coughing, sick with symptoms. People met these passengers with PPE. Anyhow, passengers should not have got off that ship because out of those 2,700, 230 were corona positive. So you can imagine these people were just allowed off the ship, allowed to go home, no quarantine, nothing. Okay. And they spread the virus quite viciously, and that was a big wave here. Yeah.
Okay. So it's fair to say that what you're going through now in Australia is actually your second wave, is the second wave. That's all the debate here in the Netherlands.
Doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt, but it's worse this time. Like we were getting nothing like Europe or New York.
Okay.
We were getting, 10 or less a day. That was the first wave, very minimal.
Yeah. Now
the lockdown was only 6 weeks. So kids weren't allowed to go to school. They did close down businesses. However, it was more like when you were working, if you can stay home, stay home. Whereas now Dan Andrews, you must have a permit to be able to work. It's very, very tight now.
Yeah, I will walk you through some examples, and I'll ask you to reflect on what's happening in Melbourne or in Australia. But first off, I interrupted you a moment ago where you were saying there's like so many cases. Just so that this is the confusing bit in the Netherlands as well, and in the United States. They're all talking about cases, but what they really mean to say is that we're testing positive. So in Australia, in Melbourne, how many people are actually sick? How many people are in the hospital? How many people are dying right now? Do you know?
Right. Yes, I understand what you're saying. So we're getting, yesterday was a big day. Well, for us it was 17 people died. So probably on average at the moment around 10 a day. But that's just Victoria. That's not the other states.
Okay. So Victoria.
There's probably about 15 in ICU and about 14 on ventilators. Yesterday's stats were 43 in ICU and a couple of hundred in hospital. So I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, Melbourne is a big city, 5 million people.
Very big.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the second city in Australia, Sydney being the first. So Victoria is the state that you're in. So just in perspective, how big is Victoria? How many people? Do you know?
Well, Geelong is the second biggest town or city outside of Melbourne. So that's about 1 hour from the CBD. It's a coastal town. That's got a couple of 100,000.
Yeah, okay.
I'd have to think maybe 1 million, an extra million if you add up all the regional spots.
Okay, so on a population of 6 or 7 million, this is the number.
That'd be accurate.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. All right, so I read an article that's on air.org called Madness in Melbourne. So I don't feel like going into the language used actually in that article, but there are some examples that I want to talk you through, because you just mentioned only one in a household is allowed to go shopping. You have a curfew.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, what I want to... Yeah, it's awful because it's affecting your personal life. But what I want to learn is are people okay with it?
No, people are, the emotions is frustrated, annoyed. This time around, people are, because the current state government is a Labor government, traditionally they're for the blue collar worker, so your labourer, but the federal government is the Liberals. So when the first wave hit, the politicians were united, whereas now they're not fighting again, but you can sense there's more of a divide. But the neighbours or people who live around me, my friends, there's some frustration, frustration towards people doing the wrong thing. There's frustration towards Dan Andrews. So people aren't being courteous and polite. It's like everyone's walking around tense would be the best description.
Tense, yeah. So Dan Andrews, that's the premier? That's like
Correct.
The elected boss of Victoria, which is the state you're in, right?
Correct.
And that compares, we don't have to go into the state system of Australia, but it compares somewhat with the states of the United States? So lots of autonomy?
No, it's more run on the English system.
Okay. So is Victoria dealing with this differently from Australia then, or is this nationwide?
We're being treated very, very differently. Very. Like, for example, in the Northern Territory, they were only getting 1 case a day in the first wave. Their pubs are open, their restaurant, they're living life as if Corona doesn't exist. So that's where Alice Springs, Rock is. South Australia, very, very open, like restaurants open, cafes open. They're still cautious, but it's almost like there's a mixed feeling towards Victorian. Some states are treating us like we have a disease. Like, oh, you've been in Victoria, they'll run a mile. Others have a lot of empathy for us, but we're definitely treated very differently from every other state. We're very isolated is a good, yeah.
Why? Is that because of Dan Andrews' policy or because you're...
No, the numbers.
The numbers.
Scare people.
Okay.
People think that, it's one person in, like, every second house someone has it, and it's not like that. Yeah.
No. Now, do you know people who are in hospital who are sick with the coronavirus personally?
Yes. One of my bosses at school was away, and I didn't know why. I thought, oh, hang on a minute, someone quite high up in the school is in charge of me. Why? And then when she came back, she told me why. She had corona.
Okay.
But I didn't, because we were on holidays at that time. So I didn't know why she was sick. apart from that, my son's school is less than a kilometre from where I live. He was attending school because my husband's an electrician, so he's classed as essential. I'm a school teacher. Sorry, I got a sore lip. I'm a school teacher, so he was permitted to go to school. However, they had a case, they shut the whole school down. Too bad if you didn't have someone to look after him. They just shut the door. It's everyone knows someone who knows someone who's had it, if that makes sense, or got it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's run by some examples of stuff happening in Australia. And one of the reasons I'm asking it, because in the Netherlands currently, you can feel it in the air. Not the virus so much, but new measures being designed.
Implemented.
No, not yet implemented. We're not there yet. But you know that in our state's capital in The Hague, they must be designing new measures for whenever they feel they're appropriate. And so
would you say that in the early stages of planning it?
They're definitely, well, that's the feeling you get. They're definitely planning. One of the things that they are planning is a new law. We'll get to measures that are taking place in Victoria. And one of them is police being able to enter your house if they feel that's required. Well, there's laws, privacy laws, that disallow police from doing that. So you would need to change the law or impose a state of emergency in order to be able to, open somebody's house and do whatever you need to do for this virus. So
it's actually got worse than that, because they've pulled a lot of the military back from wherever they were deployed overseas, and they are taking on the equal role when it comes to the fighting the virus. The military are acting the same, if that makes sense. They're carrying out the same restrictions. They're in charge as well, so it's pretty serious. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not teaching right now, but I used to be teacher, and I also taught in Brussels.
Oh.
And I remember when there was these attacks taking place also in Belgium, that there were soldiers in the street just as much as police officers, and there were automatic rifles in the streets, and that doesn't typically happen, but it was taking place right there at that time. So is that the way Melbourne streets look like right now? You have police officers and you have the military?
There's not rifles out. People think that the government may go that way, but the government has never said it. But the government's getting quite sick of people. There is a minority who are doing. For example, they knocked on 3,000 homes. This only happened a couple of days ago. 3,000 homes who were known positive cases or close contacts. So if someone was anyhow, there was 3,000 people who were meant to be isolating, and 800 of them were not home when the police or military knocked, and the government got very, very angry with that. So that's almost 1/3 who weren't self-isolating.
When you learned of that, and when I say you, I mean people living in your city. So when the Aussies learned of that, did that come as a surprise? That about 1/3 wasn't a...
No, people reacted very angry with those people for the reason that a lot of blame went towards the people, when prior to that more anger was towards Dan Andrews. Well, Dan Andrews, I'm generalising, but people before this kind of news come out, people were saying, well, Dan Andrews stuffed up the first time, we wouldn't be in this position, blah, blah, blah. This is what people on the street are saying. Whereas when the media feed reports of this thing happening, people get very angry with, we call them idiots, because people just want to get back to their normal life as soon as possible. And then you've got people who are just not complying.
Yeah, and they're being blamed. So if I summarize what I just learned from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, people that are not following the strict rules by Dan Andrews, those people are being blamed. Stay at home. I mean, you're the reason that we're in this lockdown.
Exactly.
That's a sentiment. But at the same time, anger is also directed at the government, at Dan Andrews, for imposing those measures.
Exactly.
So there's a divide in your society. Then is that
exactly.
a 50-50 split?
The media influence, you can't deny it. I mean, I'm open-minded. I don't let the media, I'm talking about the main media. Yeah. There's still that fear coming in, but it's almost like the media wants us to know what all the bad people, the people who aren't complying, it's almost like they over-exaggerate that.
Yeah. So that's another thing I see taking place in the Netherlands. But the funny thing is, so this is why this is a very interesting conversation. So thank you for being here. You're ahead of my curve. So what's happened in Australia, I feel that that's going to take place here in a couple of months or weeks.
And I don't want to be negative, but it very easily could. There's a lot of things in Victoria, reasons why we're in this situation and South Australia's not, because I honestly thought if it was going to happen in Australia, it was going to happen in Sydney, because we are multicultural, you know, but Sydney's more condensed, Melbourne's more spread out. Sydney has more Chinese international students. I really thought if it was going to happen, it would be Sydney, and it still surprises me that yeah, we're the victim.
So let's make this. Yeah, but you're assuming that's random. So it's a virus. So you don't know where it's gonna. It's random. It's gonna hit Sydney as well someday. Or no?
Correct.
Yeah. So if
I believe Sydney this may happen. You can't deny it's definitely a second wave. You can't deny it. Okay.
Let's say I were to visit you, and I will visit you sometime, health and budget.
I hope so.
But let's say I were to try that right now. What were the measures I would have to go through before I would reach your house?
Okay, so when the first wave happened, the government allowed people to come back, and this is for permanent residents or citizens. The government, actually no, they allowed people to come back and the government paid for the quarantine. If you were to come now, you would have to stay in a hotel, but I believe the expense you would have to pay. So it's $3,000 for the first person, Australian, then $1,000 for every person after that. The government won't pay that charge anymore.
All right, so if I were to visit you, hypothetically, I will visit you in better times, but I would have to stay 2 weeks in a hotel before I would even get to see you. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. We were talking about Dan Andrews. I have an image here. So that's superimposed to our conversation. You're not seeing this, but this is his tweet of a couple of days ago of the empty streets of Melbourne, and then Andrews saying thank you. So that's another thing that I feel is in the air here. Anger is in part to people not following the rules, but also to our Dutch government imposing rules that don't feel rational. So there's a divide in our society as well. If you go out, nobody's on the street. It's empty.
I liken it to, this is a good comparison, New Year's Day morning.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good. If you yeah, cool. If you do go out and you go shopping, describe how that works. So is a mouth mask mandatory if you go out?
You must. You get fined 200 Australian dollars if you don't wear a mask.
On the street between your house and the grocery shop?
As soon as I'm off my property. So if I'm on the cancel nature strip, mask has to go on.
Okay. And only one in a household is allowed to go shop. Is this checked then? I was talking to a guy from Kazakhstan a couple of months ago. They were actually given like credit card format cards. And whenever you went out, you needed to make a mark on that thing, and you could only go out so many times in a month. Just the same thing. You can only, is that?
Well, you're only allowed out 1 hour a day for exercise, no more. You can only shop. So, for example, if you and I lived in the same house, I can't go out 1 hour, then you go out 1 hour, only one person a day. And I believe not every day. So that there are strict rules on that, but you can't go 1 hour shopping every day, 1 hour exercising every day. Like, even though the limits are small, you can't add up all the hours and do like 5 different activities in the day, if that makes sense.
How is this affecting the kids in your family and in your school?
We call it cabin fever. Like, I've got a son who's very hyperactive. Before they see, all the retail shops are closed now, all the furniture shops. Bunnings is a massive hardware chain here. That's all closed. They're doing click and collect, but if the police were to find you, not fine you, you've got to give a valid reason why you're out of your house. The government wants you inside. That's the whole point that they're doing stage 4. They want you inside. They don't want you out.
So are you I'm just going to ask these questions. I'm not naive. I might know the answer, but are you allowed to visit your family if they live?
Oh, no.
So what if what
will happen is you get a fine and they get a fine.
What if one of them falls ill and needs your help?
There's exemption for medical. That's okay.
So let's say you were about to get married next week. What do?
There was a limitation where I believe they did stop marriages, and there was a local celebrant who had a massive rush. I believe marriages stopped. Funerals can still go on. But marriages only stopped, I believe, with stage 4. There's so many rules. I'm just trying to remember every one,
So, are people telling on each other? Are people snitching to police, or are they also helping each other? Is social cohesion strengthened by this, or how does that compare?
There's more. Here's some Australian slang for you: dibba dobber.
We were talking about exchanging words. You didn't remember the Dutch words anymore, and I don't remember the Australian one. So you have to explain what that means.
Dibba dobber. It comes more from the schoolyard, but people who dob on people, yes, that's more so now. People actually go looking for it because of their own situation of being locked up. They're going crazy. So they're looking to blame somebody. So if they see someone doing the wrong thing, and the government encourage it, so you can either do it on email or phone.
Okay. In Germany, a week ago, over 1 million people were out in the street protesting similar measures. Not that draconic as you're explaining, but there was a massive turnout in Berlin. Are people out protesting at all in where you live?
That's a very good question, because only yesterday on the media showed it was done. One was done at the Shrine of Resemblance, which it's a place in the city that's a shrine for all our war heroes, and that's where the protest was. And people thought that was very offensive. But what happens is, I don't know how, but it's like the police, the military get wind of it. We say they get notice of it. So when they know protesters are coming, they shut it down very, very quick. It's like the person's there and they're very quickly escorted away. It looks like a well-oiled machine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the blocking a protest before it can actually mature to something. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
So if you're not allowed to protest the corona measures, you're not allowed to protest Dan Andrews on any other topic. These are fundamental human rights, also being allowed to be critical of your government. So is that out the door right now? How does that work?
To be honest, people are more scared of the fines, even if they've got a personal belief that they don't want to pay the fine, or they don't want the hassle of going to court saying it's there. So there's a lot of people who believe it's their human right not to do it, but then they might say something, but then they'll comply.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, what I'm beginning to wonder now, so I'm having a frank conversation with you, and I believe you're having a frank conversation with me. At the same time, if government is becoming more and more restrictive, this sounds like Chinese. This is what if you're in a under a restrictive regime, you would see these measures. So this is my question to you. At what point would you feel you need to choose your words more carefully? Or because this is going to be on YouTube, on the other channels. So would it be okay to be very critical against your government, or would you rather choose your words wisely? How does that work?
Because I've got young children, I'm trying to just keep them entertained because my children are 8 and 4. I'm very aware with what's going on out there. I really don't like the fact I can't see my parents. That's probably, I could handle not seeing friends as much as it's upsetting and isolating, but not seeing my parents is killing me, to tell you the truth. Brothers and sisters, not so much, but the restrictions are quite severe. I'm just trying to, this is probably a good word, numb, just go into autopilot just to get through it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Now we've had our lockdown, just a mild variety of what you're going through, but
it might. It's possible. I'm not saying it. It's very possible, but there was a lot of things that were done wrong by the government when we had the first wave. For example, I don't know if you know, there's been an inquiry that's going on.
No, elaborate.
Okay, so what happened, there was a lot of mistakes made by the Andrews government when the first wave, and the government paid for people to stay in these 5-6-star hotels, very nice hotels. But for example, it's alleged, and you might want to research this because there's a current inquiry on it. They got some judge out of retirement, a lady judge, to do it. So what was happening was the guards weren't allowed, because obviously you need security guards to make sure that people don't go home or see their loved ones in that two weeks. So the guards were sharing the lifts with people who were isolated, well, locked up, confined. The guards weren't allowed to get taxis home together. They did. And there's allegations or some evidence that the security guards were sleeping with the quarantine people. But this is what happened, and this is how it came into our community. I live close to a suburb where security guards lived, and my postcode was one of the first postcodes, because my opinion is Dan Andrews, what he did is he locked down certain postcodes. So, for example, you know the post, right? If you lived in this postcode, you were locked down. But then the person, there were some postcodes where on the other side of the street they had a different number and they had a free life.
Okay.
It was horrible, let me tell you. And that caused people were just speechless, you know?
Yeah, it either turns you numb or very angry. That's the choice that you have. Or depressed.
Well, I saw today depression's gone up 33% on this time last year, and just today the government's putting in 60 million into mental health.
In Germany, it was reported that German children who have contracted the coronavirus or played with an infected friend must be separated from their parents in their own home. Local authorities are calling for this. But it's called psychological violence. The Association for Child Protection says if parents refuse, there's a threat of custody. Is that even worse than what you're having there? Has this been discussed in Australia already?
No. So, for example, if one of my children or my husband were to be positive and I was not, I still have to isolate because I'm deemed as close contact. However, the positive person must have their own bathroom and their meals must be brought to them. So it's like they would have their own ensuite, we call it. But they're not required to be, well, not yet. It may come if these numbers don't go down. I'm a little bit fearful that it's going to be worse. The government restrictions, because it's terrible now. Yeah. But at the moment, if there's a positive person in the house, they don't need to be removed, no.
Okay. So the fallout of our previous lockdown, which was March, April, May, and then we relaxed somewhat, is massive layoffs and people going bankrupt and business people going out of business. So is this having an economic effect in Australia already?
Oh, massive. What happened was some businesses didn't survive the first wave. Some were able to hold on by the skin of their teeth, put in their savings, sell a car to get through. And then we sort of lived a normal life for a couple of weeks. But everyone has said they cannot survive this one.
All right. So your guest to the Potkaars podcast, which is a candle, and I try to make these conversations of hope that shed light, and it's very much fun to talk to you and hear your story. But it is not a hopeful story. We didn't manage that.
Oh.
But if you no, I'm not blaming you.
Because Melbourne is a very social city. Like, there was a lot of Greeks and Italians, and we've embraced that cafe outdoor. Australia is an outdoor lifestyle. So you can imagine if you're raised in the outdoors, sport is massive in Australia.
I would imagine that you and the Australians and the Greek and your culture, your social structure would at some point say, hey, Dan Andrews, we've had enough. We demand our old lifestyle back. Is that is that coming anytime soon, you think?
I believe, well, the early signs is people are aggressive and dobbing each other in, which I believe is the wrong anger. It shouldn't be going that way. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise.
No worries. Relax.
I believe it may come to that.
Yeah.
But it's just like, if I want to go for a coffee with my husband, I can't do that because of that one person rule. And another thing, we weren't given any warning. It was just, this is how it is tonight. So when he announced it at 3:30 in the afternoon, at 6 p.m. that night, you couldn't leave your suburb. There was no preparation. That was very annoying.
It happened overnight, that's what you mean?
No, 2 hours.
Yeah, okay.
So you can imagine, if someone had someone somewhere else, it's frustrating.
All right, just to wrap up, when I was in New Zealand, I was asking the people there, why do you call yourselves Down Under? And that applies to Australia as well. And what I learned there in New Zealand is that they said, well, we feel on top of the world. That's the same as everybody. But wherever we go, if we want to go to the Western world, we need to travel a long way. So that's the Down Under bit. We're far away from pretty much everything. If you look at the rest of the world dealing with coronavirus, with their measures, what's your take on what's happening? Are there things going on that worry you even more than what's happening in your country?
Well, when we saw New York doing those, putting up those hospitals in Central Park and in Italy, and when they dug those communal graves, that had a big impact on Australians. Like, oh my gosh, this virus is real. That could be us. We do feel like we live on the other side of the world, but we're not. We believe it could be us.
Is alternative media like this podcast of mine here in the Netherlands, is that growing in Australia? Are people doing their own reporting now that the media is pretty much biased?
Well, Melbourne is very strong in the arts. So if there was a city that had your kind of podcast, it would be in Melbourne. It's got the actors, the artists, the musicians, if that makes the alternatives. But it's hard to say. It seems like the main media is still driving this.
All right. So what's your outlook on the rest of the year? Spring is coming, right? I mean, you're close to, so it's dreadful winter right now, like 10 degrees Celsius in the day, and you had snow last week, but spring is around the corner. What's your outlook?
Melbourne, we're right near the Antarctic, so we get the wind, we get, it's quite cold here. It's very cold. So the Australian rules football, so basically because of the coronavirus situation in Melbourne, all the footballers have travelled interstate, isolated this is our main football game, isolated for 2 weeks, taken their families. So I think when September comes around, because you're talking about spring, not having our grand final here, that's going to be very, very sad.
Yeah. All right.
Because it used to be just Victoria, then they made it Australian rules in the 90s. And Melbourne, you look at the Melbourne Cup, probably won't be the same. That's a big horse race. That's the first week in November. So I think when the big sporting events don't happen, that's going to be pretty depressing,
It was great talking to you, regardless all the sad things happening. So let's talk again when it improves or when things spiral out of control. Thanks for talking to me, Carolyn. Take care.
All right, thank you.
All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Every nation and every region now has a decision to make.
You think I'm joking? Predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.